Picture this. You walk into a room. Most men immediately scan for approval. They shake hands too tightly, laugh a little too loudly, make eye contact to see if they are accepted. But not you. You sit down quietly. You do not ask for permission with your posture. You do not beg for validation with your smile. And suddenly, the room changes. People feel something they cannot quite name. It is not arrogance. It is not rudeness. It is something far more unsettling. It is freedom. You have felt this before. That silent tension when others realize they cannot read you, cannot control you, cannot box you into their games. And they hate it. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you did not bend. Because you did not kneel before the invisible altar where they all worship. The altar of approval. Most men live on their knees before it. They shape their lives around it. They waste decades chasing smiles, nods, and claps. They choose careers not because they love them, but because someone told them it looked respectable. They marry women not because they truly connect, but because society told them it was time. They swallow their rage, their dreams, their truth, just to keep earning the nods. Their entire manhood is leased property, rented from the opinions of others. But you refused to sign that contract. You walked away, and that makes you dangerous. Because a man who does not need approval cannot be bought with praise. He cannot be blackmailed with shame. He cannot be steered by gossip or crushed by disapproval. He lives above the invisible currency that keeps most men enslaved. Approval is the leash that tames the herd. You have already cut it. That is why you move differently. That is why you make people nervous. That is why you feel the quiet power in your chest when others scramble for validation. And maybe you have noticed, people will call you distant. They will call you difficult. Some will even call you cold. But behind those labels hides the truth they dare not say out loud. They wish they were you. They wish they could stop caring. They wish they could sit in silence without fear. They wish they could walk away from the stage where they perform every day of their lives. You are already living the freedom they secretly dream about, and that terrifies them. You know exactly how rare that is. Look around. 99 out of 100 men are actors on a stage, waiting for applause. They measure their worth by the clapping of strangers. They live in chains they cannot even see. You are the outlier, the exception. The wolf among sheep. And the thing about wolves is this: they do not need the herd. They do not ask for permission to exist. They walk their own path, and the herd adjusts around them. That is why when you enter a room, people sense something primal. They sense the man who does not ask, the man who does not bow, the man who stands alone and therefore cannot be moved. But here is the question. If this is the power you feel now, when you have only begun to shed the weight of approval, what happens if you go further? What happens if you let go completely? How far can this path take you? What happens when a man stops needing approval altogether? When he becomes immune to the bribes and threats of society? When he no longer fears being misunderstood, unloved, or rejected? History has given us glimpses. The Stoic slave who found freedom inside his own mind. The philosopher who dared to speak against the morality of the herd. The psychologist who showed that our energy expands beyond limits once we stop living for others. Each of them lived without the leash. Each of them walked further than most men ever imagine. But this is not about them. This is about you. Because if you are here listening, it means you have already taken the first step. You have already seen through the lie. You have already tasted the power of not needing approval. And you know deep down there is more. The only question now is, how far can you go? Think about what approval really is. It is the hidden currency of society. Most people spend their entire lives trading it back and forth. They flatter their bosses to buy job security. They flatter their families to buy peace at home. They flatter strangers on social media to buy a few seconds of attention. Approval is the coin that keeps the machine turning. Without it, the entire game collapses. And that is why you are feared. You are the man who has thrown the coin back. You no longer participate in the exchange. You no longer kneel at the marketplace of validation. And when one man does this, he exposes the game. He proves that the emperor has no clothes. He shows that approval was never real power. It was only an illusion everyone agreed to believe. That is what unsettles them about you. You are proof that a man can live without the leash. You are proof that their chains are self-chosen. When they see you walk away untouched by disapproval, they feel the sting of their own cowardice. They realize they could do the same, but they will not. And so they resent you for reminding them of their weakness. Have you noticed how society reacts to men like you? At first, they try to tempt you with rewards. They dangle titles, promotions, recognition, hoping you will play along. But when that fails, they try the opposite. They shame you. They whisper that you are selfish, arrogant, impossible to deal with. And yet, none of it works because you are already immune. You are not powered by applause, so they cannot starve you of it. You are not controlled by fear of rejection, so they cannot exile you. This is why you are dangerous. A man who cannot be bribed and cannot be threatened is a man who cannot be controlled. He is the crack in the system, the exception that proves the rule was never absolute. He makes others wonder what life could be if they too stopped begging for approval. And that thought alone is enough to terrify those who depend on obedience. You have probably seen it yourself. A man at work refuses to play the game, refuses to bend just to please the boss. Everyone expects him to be crushed. But instead, he becomes respected in a way no title could buy. He becomes the symbol of independence, the proof that approval is not necessary for survival. That is why society fears you. Not because you broke their rules, but because you revealed their rules were fragile all along. If you want to understand how far a man can go once he stops needing approval, you must first understand what freedom really is. Not the freedom sold on billboards, not the freedom politicians promise, but the kind of freedom that cannot be taken away, even by force. Epictetus knew this better than most. He was not born a free man. He was born a slave in the Roman Empire. His body belonged to another. His movements were restricted, his choices controlled, his very life treated as property. One day, his master twisted his leg until the bone snapped. And yet, when others saw tragedy, Epictetus saw clarity. He said calmly, "You may have broken my leg, but you have not broken me." How could a man in chains speak like that? Because he discovered a truth most people spend their whole lives avoiding. Approval, reputation, even physical liberty, these are all outside your control. You cannot dictate what others think. You cannot command their respect. You cannot guarantee applause or admiration, but what you can control always is your own mind, your judgments, your choices, your inner stance toward life. Epictetus divided life into two categories: the things within your power and the things beyond it. Within your power are your thoughts, your actions, your will. Beyond it are the opinions of others, the shifting moods of the crowd, the fickle applause of society. To chain your happiness to approval is to hand over your soul to strangers. To build it on what is in your control is to become untouchable. Now think about yourself. You have already taken steps on this path. When you stop bending to the expectations of others, when you stop caring about the nods and claps, you are practicing the exact wisdom Epictetus lived by. You are beginning to see that the only true master of your life is you. And once a man knows this, nothing outside can enslave him. This is why a man without the need for approval can go further than anyone else. Most men collapse under social pressure because they built their identity on sand. One harsh word from a superior, one rejection from a woman, one sneer from a stranger, and their entire sense of self crumbles. But you are different. Your foundation is internal. It does not sway with the winds of opinion. It does not break under the weight of criticism. It stands firm, like a mountain surrounded by storms. Imagine that. Others spend their whole lives trying to climb mountains of recognition, begging for someone to notice them. You, meanwhile, become the mountain. Solid, immovable, impossible to ignore. That is the paradox of letting go of approval. The less you seek it, the more your presence demands respect. Epictetus taught that no man is free until he learns to rule himself. And the first chain that must be broken is the need to please others. Every time you silence yourself for fear of judgment, you add another link to the chain. Every time you act against your will just to win approval, you tighten the shackles. But every time you speak your truth, every time you walk your own path regardless of applause, the chain falls away. You have felt this before. The quiet satisfaction of saying no when everyone expected you to say yes. The pride of holding your ground when others tried to push you. The power of staying calm when they tried to provoke you. That is true freedom, and it is yours the moment you stop trading your soul for approval. Epictetus lived as a slave, yet was freer than most emperors. That is the standard. If he could achieve freedom while bound in chains, what excuse does any man have today? You live in a world that begs for your obedience through likes, comments, performance reviews, and polite applause. But you are not here to beg. You are here to rule yourself. And that is the greatest victory a man can claim. So how far can a man go once he stops needing approval? According to Epictetus, he goes as far as absolute freedom. He becomes the one man in the crowd who cannot be bent, cannot be bribed, cannot be broken. And in a world of men shackled by opinion, that man becomes untouchable. And if you are listening to this, if you have ever felt that spark of independence in your chest, you already know the taste of it. You know that freedom is not something given, it is something claimed. And you, by refusing to kneel at the altar of approval, are already further along than most men will ever be. If Epictetus showed that a man without approval is truly free, Nietzsche took it one step further. He asked, "What does a free man do with his freedom?" And his answer was as unsettling as it was powerful. He said the man who no longer bends to the herd becomes something more. He becomes the one who writes the rules the herd must follow. Think about the herd. Most men live like sheep. They cluster together, they seek safety in numbers, they move only where the shepherd allows. And what keeps them in line? Approval. The sheep are rewarded with acceptance when they stay inside the pen, and punished with shame if they stray too far. That is morality, as the herd understands it. Do what makes the group comfortable and they will clap. Step outside the lines and they will tear you apart. But Nietzsche looked at this system and laughed. He said this morality of the herd is nothing but a cage. It creates obedient men, polite men, useful men, but never great men, because greatness requires stepping outside the pen. Greatness requires a man to stop asking, "Is this approved?" and start asking, "Is this true to me?" You have felt this tension? That moment when everyone around you nods in agreement, but you know they are lying to themselves. That instant when you could speak your mind and break the spell, but you hesitate because you know the price. The herd will not approve. They will call you arrogant, cruel, dangerous, and they are right to fear you. Because the moment you stop needing their nods, you step into a power they cannot understand. Nietzsche called this the path of the Übermensch, the man who transcends the values handed to him and creates his own. Not a monster, not a tyrant, but a man who writes his own law of life instead of borrowing it from the crowd. He decides what is good, what is honorable, what is worth living and dying for. And once a man reaches that point, the herd has no choice but to adjust to him. Look at Nietzsche's own life. He was mocked in his time, dismissed as a madman, ridiculed for daring to say that morality was not absolute. He lived alone, often sick, often isolated. Yet today, the very world that scorned him uses his words to question authority, to challenge conformity, to seek power beyond tradition. The man the herd rejected became the man who rewrote how the world thinks. That is the irony of approval. Refuse it, and in the end, it comes crawling after you. Now, think about yourself. Every time you refuse to play the game of approval, you are doing exactly what Nietzsche described. You are not merely rejecting the herd. You are declaring that your life belongs to you alone. You are saying, I will not live by your applause. I will not die by your silence. I will create my own path. And that path may unsettle others, but it will always be yours. This is why a man without the need for approval can go further than anyone else. The man who seeks it remains bound by the invisible lines of the herd. He can never wander too far, never question too deeply, never dream too boldly. But the man who no longer needs it is free to go anywhere. He can tear down old walls, build new temples, invent new codes of honor. He can reshape reality itself because he is no longer chained to the morality of the crowd. Picture it. 1,000 men live as actors, waiting for applause before they move. You stand among them, silent. You do not move when they clap. You move when you decide. And suddenly, their clapping loses power. Their morality loses meaning. Their approval turns to dust. And all that remains is your will, blazing like fire in the dark. That is the moment a man stops being a sheep and becomes the wolf who sets the path. You are not meant to follow, you are meant to create. And society knows this. That is why they fear men like you, not because you broke their rules, but because you revealed their rules were never binding. You remind them that morality is not carved in stone. It is written by men, and the man who no longer begs for approval becomes the one who writes. So how far can you go once you stop needing approval? Nietzsche's answer is clear. You can go as far as rewriting the very laws that govern life. You can go as far as turning rejection into respect, mockery into legacy, isolation into power. You can go so far that the herd that once laughed at you will one day live inside the world you created, and when that day comes, they will not remember the claps they withheld. They will only remember the man who never asked for them. If Epictetus showed that freedom begins when you stop needing approval, and Nietzsche revealed that such freedom allows you to rewrite the rules, William James added the final piece. He explained why a man without the burden of approval can go further than anyone else. Because his energy, his focus, his very mind are no longer divided. They are united, sharp, and unstoppable. James was not just a philosopher. He was the father of modern psychology. He studied the mind not as an abstract riddle, but as a force that shapes destiny. His insight was simple but radical. He said that a man becomes what he consistently pays attention to. Where your focus goes, your life follows. Now, think about the average man. Half of his attention is wasted on what others think. Did they like what I said? Did they notice my effort? Do they approve of who I am? This constant loop of self-monitoring bleeds him dry. It steals the energy that should have gone into building, creating, conquering. His mind becomes like a leaking bucket, always draining because he is too concerned with the eyes of the crowd. But you are different. When you no longer care about approval, you patch the leak. You stop bleeding energy into the endless void of other people's opinions. Suddenly, all of that power is yours again. And when it is fully yours, it becomes almost frightening in its intensity. James described it this way: the average man uses only a fraction of his potential because the rest is trapped in fear of disapproval. But the man who is free of that fear can channel all of himself into action. His attention is no longer scattered. It becomes a laser, and with that laser, he can cut through obstacles that stop ordinary men cold. You have felt this before. The difference between working while looking over your shoulder and working with full immersion. The times when you cared about how it would be received, your strength was divided. But the times when you stopped caring, when you did it purely because it mattered to you, you tapped into something limitless. You moved faster, created more, reached deeper. That is the psychology James was pointing to. Imagine what it means to live your entire life that way. Every day, every action, every thought, free from the drag of seeking approval. The power that would unlock is not incremental, it is exponential. Because each day you would compound, building not on fear but on pure focus. Others would burn out under the weight of opinions. You would rise because you carry no such weight. And this is where the danger lies. Society does not want men like you, fully focused. A man unburdened by approval can create art that cannot be censored, ideas that cannot be silenced, businesses that cannot be controlled. He is not swayed by trends, not bent by critics, not slowed by doubt. He becomes a force of nature, a storm that no one can contain. That is why the crowd whispers. That is why they label you cold or difficult. It is easier to call you names than to face the uncomfortable truth. You are playing the game on a level they cannot reach. Think about it. While others divide their attention between their work and their image, you give yourself entirely to the work. While they exhaust themselves chasing approval, you conserve your energy and channel it into results. In the end, who goes further? Who leaves the deeper mark? Who creates the legacy that outlives him? James believed that most men die having used only a sliver of what they were capable of. But the man who no longer seeks approval dies having touched the full range of his power. That is how far you can go. Not just beyond the limits of society, but beyond the limits you once thought were fixed within yourself. And when people ask how you achieved so much, you will not point to applause or recognition. You will say the truth. You stopped leaking your power into the empty well of approval. You turned it inward. You focused. And that focus carried you further than anyone believed possible. So after all this, the question still stands. How far can a man go once he stops needing approval? We have seen hints of the answer through the eyes of three men who lived in different ages under different conditions, yet pointed to the same truth. Epictetus showed us the first step. He proved that the man who drops the need for approval cannot be enslaved, not even by chains. The world can take his wealth, his health, even his body, but it cannot touch his inner freedom. That is the foundation. You are already unbreakable when you refuse to let opinions dictate your worth. Nietzsche took us further. He said freedom is not the end, it is the beginning. Once you no longer bow to the herd, you gain the power to create values of your own. You stop asking what the crowd approves of and start asking what is true to you. That is where greatness is born. The man who does not beg for applause becomes the man who writes the script the crowd will one day follow. And William James showed us the final layer. When approval no longer drains your energy, your attention sharpens into a weapon. You stop scattering yourself on gossip and validation. You direct your full force into what matters. And in that focus, you discover how much you were capable of all along. Potential that once lay dormant now awakens. And with it, you go further than the world thought possible. Put them together and the picture is clear. How far can a man go once he stops needing approval? As far as absolute freedom, because no chain can bind him. As far as rewriting the rules, because he is no longer trapped by the herd. As far as his limitless potential, because every ounce of his energy is directed forward, not wasted sideways. This is the answer. He can go further than kings who rule with titles, because their crowns are fragile without applause. He can go further than armies that march in step, because their unity collapses without approval. He can go further than the herd itself, because the herd is always waiting for permission to move. He does not wait, he goes. And in the end, the world is forced to follow. And now you know the truth. This is not just a question for history. It is your question. It is your answer. Because the moment you cut the leash of approval, you are already walking further than most men will ever dare. You know now what most men never discover. Approval was the leash, and you cut it. That alone makes you rare. That alone makes you dangerous. Because in a world where everyone is begging to be liked, the man who does not beg becomes untouchable. Think about it. Most men spend their lives asking silently, am I good enough? Do they accept me? Do they approve? They never escape the invisible jury in their heads, and that is why their lives are small, predictable, and safe. But you walked away from that court. You stopped waiting for the verdict. You declared yourself free, and that declaration has already carried you further than the herd will ever walk. You may not feel it every day. Sometimes the silence of not being applauded feels heavy. Sometimes the rejection stings. But underneath that, there is a deeper current, a force moving through you. It is the strength that comes from knowing you cannot be bought or broken. It is the authority of a man who lives by his own compass, not the shifting winds of public opinion. You are more dangerous than kings because their crowns depend on loyal applause. You are more enduring than armies because their unity collapses without approval. You are more free than emperors because their power still bends to the crowd. But you bow to no one. And that is how far a man can go, beyond the reach of the herd, beyond the chains of society, beyond the limits of his own fear. He becomes not just another figure in the crowd, but the man who stands apart, the man who rewrites the script, the man whose footsteps echo long after the clapping has died. So remember this: approval is borrowed power, freedom is owned power. And you, by walking without the leash, have claimed what most men will never touch. When others hesitate, you move. When others conform, you create. When others wait for permission, you are already gone. A man who stops needing approval does not simply go far. He goes where no one else dares. He becomes the measure, not the measured. The standard, not the follower. And when history looks back, it does not remember the applause. It remembers the man who did not need it. And if you are hearing these words now, it means you are that man, the one who no longer waits for the nods of others, the one who already knows his worth, the one who will walk further, higher, deeper than the crowd can even imagine. You are the man who does not need approval, and that means you are already unstoppable.